Hello everyone. In today's lecture, we are going to focus on data collection. Data collection plays a vital role in the process of research because this is the time when we as researchers will be directly exposed to the content of our research, either through primary or secondary source. Primary data dominantly reflects on collecting data from its original source itself, in the sense that we are collecting data about adolescent, we'll collect it directly from the adolescents. On the other hand, secondary data dominantly reflects on data collection method from secondary resource, in the sense printed articles, journals, newspaper articles, and so on. In this lecture, we are going to focus on different data collection methods, such as field visit, focus group discussions or focus group interviews, different interviews techniques, such as semi-structured interview, elite interview, problem-focused interviews, and so on. Let's focus first on field data collection method. Most qualitative researchers will at some time have a point to go to their research site in order to collect data. This process sometimes is called field work and other times it is called field research. Doing field work requires a sense of artistry combined with practical approach. The artistry is related to reading situations, making sound but perhaps unusual decisions, following gut reactions, and sometimes taking risk. This practice involves careful planning and preparation. Field work at its fundamental level is the process of collecting raw data from natural setting. Fieldwork often is taken up by qualitative researchers because of its wide capacity for letting them capture information about the ways in which individuals inhabit and experience their social worlds. Fieldwork often include interviews of various sorts, natural conversation, and various other unusual techniques dominantly to collect raw data from its original source. Fieldwork requires researchers' awareness of the context, values, and background of the site which is being studied. Therefore, fieldwork often involves researchers to engage in a number of different activities. Fieldwork can often allow researchers to see what they are really going to study in a specific context and understand both in a formal as well as informal context. And that's what makes fieldwork research stand out from others. Now let's focus on different types of fieldwork. We are going to speak about detective fieldwork, ethnographic fieldwork, solo fieldwork, team fieldwork, collaborative fieldwork, outside fieldwork, insider fieldwork, overt fieldwork, and covert fieldwork. The first one is detective fieldwork. This approach to fieldwork is based on the premise that everyone has different point of view and that some of these views may not overlap with individuals' views on the number of issues. Detective fieldwork is hunting for clues, tracking down stories, perspectives from different people in order to make sense of a context or a problem or an issue. Detective, in the sense, the research tries to recognize different and diverse perspectives of the information, or rather they say the truth. The idea of seeing fieldwork as a detection also helps researchers to realize that fieldwork is a process of data collection and analysis in the field, and writing both in and beyond field. So as informed earlier, in this process, we are not only collecting data formally as well as informally. So that makes detective fieldwork research stand out. Here, as the term says detective, it involves certain form of investigative approach to understand truth from a multi-perspective way. The next one is ethnographic fieldwork. The ethnographic fieldwork is standing out from others mainly because it involves certain amount of longitudinal approach, and in this process the diversity in cultures can also be studied. The researchers often engage in longitudinal process, tries to understand culture from a longitudinal perspective. When we connect ethnographic research to field work, we need to understand that we are staying on the field and trying to do a longitudinal study to understand the culture from a 360-degree point of view. Ethnographic fieldwork researchers often require the researchers to spend time with the culture for a long, the more time you spend, the better quality of information is collected. There are three most important characteristics of ethnographic fieldwork. The first one is spending time in the setting. To make a good ethnographic fieldwork, we need to allot good amount of time to understand the people at its best. The second thing is becoming immersed in the culture. So for a good ethnographic field work, we can't just observe as a third party. It is preferred that being a researcher, I am understanding the culture by being in the culture. So the researcher is expected to immerse themselves and spend a good amount of understanding about the culture. And the third important characteristic is sound relationship with research participants. A lot of time, we have come across studies where researchers have gone to specific secluded populations where they are being part of the people and part of the culture, where they are engaging in specific cultural practices. So this is playing a very important role to understand that they're trying to be a part of the culture by itself. So to actually engage in ethnographic research, a good researcher is expected to have healthy relationship and sound relationship with research participants, especially to collect the data at its best. The next one is solo fieldwork. In solo fieldwork, a researcher alone goes to the field and collects data. This is the most common type of field work, yet it can be lonely and challenging because as a solo researcher, there is relatively little support. If something occurs that is troublesome or discomforting, there is no one to fall back on, and there is a team of, as there is no team of research. New researchers, however, often are accompanied by research supervisors prior to undertaking fieldwork alone. This is because planning fieldwork will require researchers to understand its purpose and its pitfall. It requires careful conceptualization and design, as well as a sound plan. Thus, researchers need to develop their knowledge of fieldwork prior to entering the field. The next thing is team fieldwork. In team fieldwork, a group of researchers comes together to work across a project, but individuals work separately while collecting data. This type of fieldwork often is employed during a multi-site study. Team meets regularly to share findings and adapt to the research design. However, they do not use explicit co-inquiry techniques, but rather work independently to collect the data, which they can collate and discuss later. The next one is collaborative fieldwork. In this form of fieldwork, which is usually used, it approaches in a participatory manner and in the form of participatory action research. This involves collaborative inquiry where researchers and participants work together as partners. This level of co-inquiry is needed. Therefore, we can understand that it requires highly committed researchers and highly committed participants for it to be successful. During fieldwork, the research team works together to share understandings regardless of the kinds of data collected. In particular, they use explicit shared reflection dominantly to reflect on perspectives and their views about the collective goal, or rather say the collective goal of the research. The next one is outside fieldwork. In outside fieldwork, the researcher goes to research setting to collect data in order to understand unfamiliar or make familiar strange. A classic example of outsider research is given by Greets, where now let's understand outside fieldwork. In outside fieldwork, the researcher goes to a research setting to collect data in order to understand the unfamiliar situation. Dominantly from an outsider's perspective, they are usually not within the participants, or usually the outside fieldwork researchers approach the situation as an outsider. So the challenge of outsider research is that the researcher is outside, sometimes feeling as if they are looking into a situation. For example, I want to understand the experiences of a specific classroom. I am looking at the field or the classroom from an outside situation rather than being inside the classroom setting. The next one is inside fieldwork. The inside fieldwork or insider fieldwork is an approach in which researchers investigate the context in a way or in the space where the researcher socializes or stays. So the advantage of being an insider researcher, where the information collected by an insider will be much more than that in the outside field work. Here, the insider field work, the data collected is more enriching than the one with outside field work. The main reason why sometimes still outsider field work happens is when the permissions are not granted for an inside field work. The next one is overt field work. This is very simple. Here, the participants know the presence of researcher. Here, in this kind of field work, the research happens with the full knowledge of the participants. The opposite of it is covert field work. In this kind of field work, the researcher or the aspect that the participants are being researched is done in secret or without consent. Usually, there can be ethical concerns associated with this kind of field work. So yeah, these are the types of field work. Let's go to the next content. Now let's understand how we should choose the appropriate research type or field research type for our study. If we are having clear-cut goals for our research, then we can opt for detective or ethnographic research, mainly where we know that we have to solve a mystery or exploring everyday life. When the goal is clear, then we can prefer having detective or ethnographic approach. The next way of choosing the appropriate field work type is based on the number of researchers. If the lack of researchers are there, then solo research is preferred. If data is expected to be collected from multiple sources or multiple sites, teamwork can be preferred. On the other hand, a research where co-inquiry is needed. For example, we try to understand a specific culture from multi-research perspective, or the participants also need to be equally involved, where participant also wants to be heard and reflected well. That's the time when collaborative research can be promoted. The research where perspective plays a very important role. We want to sometimes understand a situation based on an insider's view, how a specific class feels by being an insider in the class. A specific research can be done. So that can involve insider's perspective. If we want to understand a situation from a third person point of view, or if we don't get consent to be an insider, outside research or outside field work can be done. The last one is field work by the level of disclosure. It can be overt or covert. So certain research expects the participants to know that they are being researched. That's when overt research is preferred. There are specific research where participants should not be aware that they are being researched. That's when covert research will play a role. And in covert research, there can be ethical concerns. Now let's speak about how to prepare oneself for the field visit. First thing is, we need to know whether we have access to the geographical location or access to the population. Once we have it, only then we can proceed further to decide about our research interest. The next thing is language. Because in psychology and in mental health, we need to interact with people, it is preferred that we know the language with whom we are expected to interact with. If we don't have the knowledge of the language, we at least need to have access to the translators. The next one is awareness. Before going to the research field, one needs to be aware about the possible dangers, seeing details, the expectations of the people, and various other factors which can affect your research journey has to be checked prior going to the field. The next one is writing skills. This is probably one of the most important aspect of field visit. A researcher needs to have the ability to collect and record details while they are on the field. So that will involve a good writing skills where the observations and the data collection can be well and structurally recorded. There are various means of or process of data collection dominantly in the field visit aspect. The first one is, while a person is interacting with people of a specific culture or in the process of field visit, one can take handwritten notes or digital handwritten notes while taking the interview. The second thing is taking notes through audio, video, or online. Audio in the sense, when we are taking interviews or interacting, we can collect the audio recordings after seeking consent. The next thing is video. So audio, video will involve visual expressions as well as the verbal information being recorded. This can be used for the further research in qualitative needs. The third one is online. Sometimes online interviewing is done in the field visit. It can be done through chat or email based on the people whom we are interacting with. This involves a strong disadvantage, mainly because there is a lack of direct communication or connection with our participants. The next thing is memos. Memos often play a very important role as it acts as kind of a circular, or it can be in a form of scroll or post-its, which often act as a literature. It can even be in the form of drawing. This literature often can help understand a specific culture or a specific understanding, dominantly in terms of qualitative perspective. The next thing is journaling during fieldwork. Journaling often involves certain form of reflection. Journaling allows reflection upon the general research process while, or rather say after or at the end of the research work done during the field visit. This often makes researchers reflect on conflict, frustrations, and fatigue which a researcher might have experienced. This can help to avoid subjectivity in the process of data collection. This is all about field visit or field work. This is all about field work. Now let's go to the next content. Now let's go to the next content, that is interview. You all have done the semi-structured or semi-standardized interview during your minor project. We are going to reflect on the process of interview and reflect on focus group interview, semi-structured interview, problem-centered interview, expert interview, and elite interview. When we speak about interview, it involves one-on-one interaction. In terms of research, it is an interaction between the researcher as well as the participants. The main goal of this interview is to reach and fulfill the research goals. When we speak about interviews, it can be in the form of structured manner. Structured manner in the sense they have very rigid set of questions, and the response we expect from our participants usually is predictive in the sense we ask participants how they felt about a specific situation. The options are already given. So the answers given by a participant is predictive. So I ask you, how are you feeling? I only give you two options, good or bad. The question is structured. The response expected is also structured. The next one is unstructured interview, where the researcher often asks questions somewhere keeping the goal in mind, but it is in an unstructured manner. So anything and everything around the world can be asked in the process of the interview. Sometimes spontaneous questions can come up where the researcher asks the interviewees. The next one is semi-structured interview. It's a combination of structured and unstructured interview where certain predictable answers are there, but even more than that, we give a direction to the interview. So we keep questions which are open-ended by nature, but same questions are asked and decided prior to the Now let's speak about semi-structured interview. It is a combination of structured and unstructured interview. In semi-structured interview, the researcher dominantly focuses on having predetermined questions, but the answers expected are in open-ended form. The answer is not usually restrictive. The next one is informal interview. Usually, it is like a conversation where there is no question answer per se, but it is like a conversation between researcher and research participants. Let's focus on focus group research. Focus group interviews often share similar characteristics with individual interviews. However, the structure and form differs to a level. A focus group interview allows researcher in particular to view social interaction in the process, and they require researchers to operate in a way to allow this to happen. So in short, if we are, instead of taking one-on-one interview, which you did it during your research, we call all our participants and expect them to come together, and then the question is asked, and that's how the research progresses. A focused group interview often is a combination of idea of group interview and focus group, where in this focus group interviews, we ask specific structured, usually semi-structured question to elicit specific directional response from the group. As mentioned by Creswell, who is a very famous researcher in the field of social sciences, he mentioned that a focus group interview can help researcher to gather information about participants' perception, often related to a specific area of interest. This helps people to understand the group perspective in a better manner. There are various types of focused group interviews. We are going to discuss a few of them. The first one is exploratory focused group. This aims to increase researchers' understanding of an issue, sometimes for the purpose of developing research question. So here the group is assembled and asked some very basic open-ended questions, where the group typically is used in many, here a group of people come together and open-ended questions are asked, and thereby the researcher, after giving the question, expects participants to respond accordingly. The next one is phenomenological focus groups. Here, what is important is the group's views and experiences. Here, what happens is the essence of someone's subjective experiences, their consciousness, and the subjective feeling for a specific situation is understood in depth. In exploratory focused group, the ideas are discussed. In phenomenological focus groups, subjective experiences play a very important role. The next one is clinical focus groups. This aims to examine participants' hidden views to explore what might be affecting their predispositions or specific behaviors. So in the sense, if we try to understand what is the underlying cause for a specific behavior, we often do clinical focus groups. In practice, clinical focus groups are often used when we are trying to understand people's conditions with specific disorders such as depression and various other health concerns. We can often see clinical focus group are being used in health and medical sections because sometimes it gives a newer perspective or reasons for a specific concerning behavior. The next one is pretty interesting, which is called storyline focus group. This enables researchers to understand what issues or concerns people find in a specific situation. In the sense, people are provided with a plot or a storyline with missing components which they are asked to complete. So an incomplete story is given, and the group often uses action research. As previously discussed, action research tries to find solution. So how people complete stories or have a discussion about how the story is going to be complete, that often is part of storyline focus groups discussion. The next one is issue development focus group. This is to gain an overview of the reactions. The next one is issue development focus group. This is to gain an overview of the reactions of general populace. In the sense, here, a presentation is made either by two or more competing or controversial topics, and the group's responses are noted. In the sense, suppose we are trying to understand the communal. Suppose we are trying to understand the communal differences between two specific groups. Here, the groups are brought in and they are made to discuss about the controversial idea. For example, perspectives about LGBT community. So some people can be seated there who are for, and some people who can be seated who are completely against the idea, and how the group responses together can be made a note of. Now let's speak about variations of focus groups. The first one is Delphi technique. The term Delphi technique comes after the ancient Greek. The next thing is variations of focus group. The first one is Delphi technique. Variations of focus group dominantly means that which method of focus group will be used or which technique of focus group will be used. The first one being Delphi technique. This method is often done on experts. So in short, when we do focus group discussions where experts are involved, that is Delphi technique. This is a method which is designed to gain what is termed as opinion stability through using various rounds of questioning across, sometimes going on for months. Usually it can go up to 3 or 4 rounds of focus group discussion of experts, and that can go up to a few months. The purpose of Delphi technique is to understand different perspectives of different experts on similar goals of the research. It can often give a platform or a space for discussions for experts, which may not be possible during individual surveys or interviews. The next one is nominal group technique. Here, unlike the traditional belief system, in nominal group technique, the number of participants plays a very important role. Here, it involves smaller groups of participants. Here, in nominal group technique, smaller groups are involved, and that makes it stand out from the traditional focus group discussions. Being a smaller group, the ideas and opinions can be well understood, and almost everybody gets a chance to speak and share their opinion. In a structured nominal group technique, each participant in turn contributes to the understanding of the topic. So these are different variations in focus group interviews. The next one is designing and doing focus groups. It's so one of the few things which we have to keep in mind while doing a focus group discussion is the role of researchers and the responsibilities. As you know, it involves interviewing or a discussion happening for a group of people. The researcher needs to be good enough to moderate it in a healthy manner. So sometimes a researcher or the moderator can hire trained moderator. So somebody who has undergone a training for conducting focus group discussions, they can be the one who moderates the group sessions. The second thing which can happen is dual moderators. Here in dual moderators, different moderators who are typically not the researcher but selected by and trained by the researcher often take opposite stances on the discussion of the topic or an issue and thereby moderating the session. The third one is two-way group moderator, or the third one is respondent moderator. One of the respondent who is a part of the group becomes the moderator for the focus group discussion. Sometimes focus group discussion can take place even in an online platform, that is media focused group discussion or focus group interview. We have Zoom and various other platforms where people come together and share their ideas and opinions. That is media focused group discussions. This often is feasible where the respondents are in different locations. When a person is doing a group discussion, it is also advisable they go from a general idea, which is aimed for the goal of the study, to a specific component in the study. So the flow of group discussion should include questions which are generic by nature, related to the goal, and then going to very specific intricacies so that people on the flow becomes proper and participants also are aware about what to say and how the structure is going. The beginning of the session or a topic should be including dominantly broader ended questions, and then once the interviewees are comfortable, specific questions can be asked and the focus group discussion can go on. The next thing is behavior to attitude questions. This technique allows interviewees to tell their own stories about what they have done and gradually they will be more comfortable to speak about their attitude associated with it. Here, it often helps people to elicit better and quality data. The next thing we have to keep in mind while doing focus group discussion is the first few questions should focus more on the positive side, and the next set of questions can include the negative aspects associated with the research. The last and the most important thing is setting rules for your focus group discussion. Prior to starting the focus group discussion, specific rules and regulations can be conveyed to the participants. Rules such as only one person talks at a time, confidentiality aspect, keeping conversation in group in the sense there should not be side conversations going on. All participants should plan to participate, since like when you are in a group, sometimes in a friend circle some people remain quiet. That should not be happening in a focus group discussion, and so on. Now let's, in a brief manner, reflect on the ways of managing focus group discussion. The first thing we have to keep in mind is dominating conversation. Even if we reflect on our friend circle, there can be certain set of people who are more dominating than others, in the sense they share their opinions more widely and more openly than others, thereby directing the session to a specific manner. In the sense, people may be more comfortable. Now let's speak about managing focus group discussion. There can be times when we are interacting with friends, the other person is more dominating. So when the dominating conversation takes place, not everyone is okay to share their opinions. So when you are having a focus group discussion, we need to keep in mind that there will be people who are overpowering others in terms of their opinions and ideas. The moderator needs to keep a stance on it so that the participants and other participants should have the space and the opportunity to speak their minds. There can be also times where even if you are, as a moderator, asking questions, participants are not responding. So as a moderator, we need to be equipped to deal with that as well. The researcher should make an effort to determine the possible reasons for silence, mainly to know whether they are uncomfortable with the question or try to understand what is the reason for their silence, and an effective plan can be planned out. Group veers off task, in the sense sometimes when a group discussion is happening, sometimes topics gets diverted. That should be consciously avoided, and making sure that the direction of focus group is at par. The next one is having side conversation. Because a number of people are involved, it is possible that two participants continue talking to each other instead of involving in the part of discussion. So a conscious effort should be made that side conversations are not happening and participants of the study are with the focus group discussion. Now let's reflect last on the advantages and challenges of a focus group discussion. It often mimics a group discussion, so thereby involving multiple set of people at the same time, and data is collected for a multiple set of people. Because multiple set of people are involved, information is more quick than interviews. And if we are having expert focus group discussions, contradicting ideas can be challenged and discussed at the same time. Now let's speak about the disadvantages or challenges associated with focus group discussion. Sometimes when ideas are complex, people, in the sense complex beliefs are associated with one person, Not everybody is okay to speak about it in a group setting. Certain sensitive informations such as rape or abuse, such terminologies, if used, sometimes can make people feel uncomfortable while conversing. And the third thing is sometimes a single focus group discussion can go on, taking a lot of time. And because it is a conversation, it can extend for a longer time than the experimenters or researchers' anticipation. So yeah, these are specific drawbacks associated with focus group discussion. Okay, so now let's go to the semi-standardized interviews. This is something which we all have already done. A semi-standardized interview is a means of data collection where predetermined questions after following reflexivity are framed and the interview takes place. The best thing about semi-structured or semi-standardized questions are usually directional, but the answers expected are open-ended by nature. In research, semi-structured interview are often used in qualitative purposes, mainly because of its open-ended approach, where it can be used as an exploratory tool in terms of understanding the experiences in marketing, social sciences, and so on. Unlike unstructured interview, the semi-structured interview often elicits responses from the participants where opinions and ideas are shared. In unstructured interview, it is very common that the direction of the research can go directionless because of its in semi-structure. However, the direction is preset. In structured interview, what happens is it is very structured where only a specific order of sequence is presented. But when it becomes semi-structured, it offers a structure but in a flexible format. So because you have already done the semi-structured interview, let's understand the benefits of it. As we already know, semi-structured interview is a combination of structured and unstructured. So it basically takes the benefits of both, and a research is done in qualitative means. Because of its semi-structured nature, there is a lesser chance for that the researcher is going out of direction and the research purpose is met. Because of the open-ended nature of the semi-structured interview, the detailed information collected is usually more rich and more informative. Now let's speak about disadvantages of semi-structured interview. If reflexivity is not followed, the validity of the questions used in semi-structured interview can be lacking. So to avoid subjectivity, and in a way we are measuring what we intend to measure, reflexivity has to be used. Sometimes in the process of analysis, research bias can be very evidently shown. Even in the form of while taking the interview, subjective biases can be very evidently reflected. The third thing, and I think some of you all already faced it, framing semi-structured interview is a skill by itself because the purpose of the research should be met. However, the answer expected from a participant should be neutral, or rather say our questions should not be giving direction to what kind of expectations we have from our participants. We all already know the process of conducting semi-structured interviews, so we'll just briefly go through it. The first step is setting our goals. Then we design our questions. As we already know, we are going to validate the question through expert and peer review. Then we find our participants. We decide which medium we are going to use, either online or offline. Based on that, we conduct our interviews, analyze the data either in inductive or deductive methods. This has already been discussed. And later, we present our results based on posteriorities and the findings. The next thing we are going to focus on is problem-centered interview. When I speak about problem-centered interview, the main thing we need to understand is the main focus here is reconstructing individual and group specific norms or meanings. The main approach of problem-centered interview is mostly to find solutions to a specific problem which exists at large in our society. PCI is a theory generating technique where we use either deductive or inductive or even abductive methods to come up to an explanation to a specific problem which happens in our society. One of the important and landmark feature of problem-centered interview is the ability of an individual to construct meaning of a situation, as well as try to understand how society kind of influences this aspect. So in short, if a specific issue is being discussed, the first thing which is going to be focused on is how individual constructs or gives meaning to a specific situation. And later part is trying to understand this how societal norms are playing a role regarding understanding of the same. During the last few years, the problem-centered interview has been widely used within different areas of social research. So now let's go ahead with the process of PCI. As you already are aware that PCI dominantly focuses on the problems or social related problems. The first phase involves preparation for interview. The preparation for interview dominantly involves a good a priori, which is the literature review. Based on the a priori, a semi-structured interview ideally is formed. After expert validation and your reviews, the final set of questions are prepared. The second thing here is, or the second stage is conducting the actual interview. The process of conducting the interview is decided based on the means we are going to interview. So whether we are going to do an online interview or an offline interview, that has to be decided. Once that is decided, the third phase where the actual analysis and the results are found out, the results can be in the form of narrative analysis. I'll go back to the previous stage where we are actually conducting the interview. Often in PCI, narrative approaches involved where initial open-ended questions will trigger or provoke a response where the narrative approach, or rather say the story-based approach, can be implemented. The narrative approach is already discussed previously, so kindly go through that for further clarifications. So the thing about using narrative approach here is the stories and the experiences which the participant says is going to help the researchers understand the emerging of idea from an opinion point of view, as well as from societally driven point of view. Now let's go to the third point where when we are actually analyzing we are going to do, we are trying to analyze the data in terms of its narration. So when we are analyzing, the main goal is to find conclusions which can be societally applicable. Sometimes in the previous phase, when we are actually conducting the interview, we can use confrontations and questions of understanding so that the reasons or the problems in general can be understood from a better perspective. So, researcher named Andres Witzel mentioned that there are two specific techniques which can be used in the process of data collection, which will help in analysis, which is confrontation and questions of understanding. Confrontation questions are often given to confront the interviewees on the aspects the second phase is conducting the interview. The interview often starts with an open-ended question, dominantly for a narrative interview. Initial open-ended questions will act as a probe for the further narration or story to be reflected. After the interviewed person has finished his or her narration, in reply to initial question, probing can be done to elicit more responses. Ad hoc questions can also be given to elicit more responses. Ad hoc questions often helps to get a little more clarity about the data or responses given. Although ad hoc term can appear slightly misleading, but however, even though this appears like a clarity requirement-based questions, these are not on-spot decided. These are questions which are decided prior. Some researchers have mentioned that confrontation and question of understanding plays a vital role for PCI or problem-centered interview. The third phase is interpreting problem-centered interviews. Here, the analysis takes place. Here, the analysis can be case-wise or in terms of understanding the narrations, where we can use action approaches to analyze our data. To put in simple terms, if the past information did not make sense, we simply divide PCI into three phases. First one is preparation phase, where we plan out our research based on a priori frame and questions. And in the second phase, we actually conduct the interview. Dominantly, these interview can be in form of narration. And the to actually conduct the narration, we use the predetermined open-ended questions. Once the data is collected, we go to the next phase where we analyze the data just like we do it in narrative analysis. The different process of analyzing PCI will be discussed in next chapter. Now we go to the next thing, which is an expert interview. Expert interview, as it sounds, we do an interview on a person who we consider as an expert in the specific field. For example, I want to interview different scientists in the field of biotechnology. I may call out different researchers, different experts who work in different institutes to come together for the interview. Now let's look at different characteristics of expert interview. The first thing is defining who is an expert. So expert is somebody who has specialized in the specific area. The definition of expert can be decided by the researchers of the specific study. The next thing is the focus should be on somebody who is more knowledgeable rather than somebody who has an interesting biography. To put it in simple terms, if I'm doing a research on psychologist, I will look by their qualification as a psychologist rather than them being social media influencers in the field of psychology. Now let's go to elite interview. Elite, as the term says, interviews are done on famous people. Elite interviews are very common in social sciences, dominantly in political science. Elite interviews helps to understand people's purpose for a specific decision, which can have a long-term global impact or political impact. Researchers often use the term researching or studying up. As the term says, we are interviewing elites who we consider above us. So sometimes when we are interviewing people, they may be famous people. So elite interviews are often engaging in these aspects. So because they are elite, there can be a power dynamics playing a role when we are interviewing these people. So there is a difference in power between the researcher and researchers. It can affect the quality of research if the researcher is not following reflexivity. Reflexivity often helps to remove biases. So if you are suppose you are interviewing Shah Rukh Khan, who is a famous person. So when you're interacting with him, your role as a fan might play a role in the process of interviewing. So this is something very common when elite interviews are taking place. So that is the process of research remains same as all the interview methods. The only difference here is who we are interviewing. So that is from my side. The remaining details will be discussed during your class hours. From your exam point of view, try to understand strengths and weaknesses of each of these techniques and try to understand the applicative value. Thank you and have a nice day and best of luck for your exam.